The Hurtgen Forest had already earned its nickname, Death Factory. Trees were splintered into daggers. Fog swallowed sound. And on November 21st, 1944, a 26-year-old lieutenant named Paul Bosch realized something horrifying. The German counterattack forming in front of him would slice straight through his regiment's flank in minutes. And he had no artillery, no tank support, no reinforcements, just a mine detector, a spool of comms wire, and a failing defensive line collapsing under incoming mortar fire. If you haven't already, subscribe, because today we're diving into one of the most insane, forgotten episodes of WW2. A moment when one American officer attempted the impossible, to rewire the battlefield under fire, alone, before German armor reached his men. Bosch had been a wrestler before the war. Strong, quick, calm under pressure. But nothing in his training, nothing in any army manual, had prepared him for what he saw through the trees. German infantry massing, machine gun teams positioning, armor engines warming in the mist. Their attack would begin within minutes. His radios were dead. His phone lines were shredded. Artillery was deaf to his calls. If he didn't restore communications immediately, the Germans wouldn't just break through, they would roll up the entire 121st Infantry's flank. The only way to reach the down cables was to crawl into a ravine already being pounded by registered German mortars. Nobody ordered him to go. Everybody expected him to die if he did. But Bosch didn't hesitate. He grabbed the spool, slung his .45 over his chest, and ran straight into the fog, toward the explosions, toward the advancing Germans, toward the place every instinct told him no soldier should ever go. Because sometimes in war, survival depends on doing the exact thing the manuals call insane. He vanished into the smoke, and the forest swallowed him. Bosch slid down the muddy slope into the ravine, boots punching into cold water, hands tight around the spool of wire that now felt heavier than a machine gun. Above him, the forest canopy shook with each mortar burst. Splinters rained like needles. The ravine was the worst possible place to be. It was where German observers knew American runners hid. They had zeroed in on it days earlier. Any movement inside meant instant fire. And yet, this was exactly where the communications lines ran. Torn apart, buried, smashed under fallen trees. Without them, the regiment was blind. He dropped to his stomach and crawled. The ground vibrated with approaching armor. German engines, unmistakable. Bosch's breath fogged in front of him. He reached the first severed line, brushed off the mud, and began splicing. His fingers shook, not from fear but from the cold and the concussion blast hammering the ravine walls. Then voices. German voices. Close. He froze under a log as two Wehrmacht infantrymen scrambled down into the ravine to find better firing angles. They were less than 5 meters away. He had two choices, shoot and die, or stay silent and pray they never looked down. His heart pounded so hard it felt audible. One German set up his MG-42 on the lip of the ravine. The other scanned the tree line, unaware an American officer lay beneath his boots. Bosch kept his head pressed to the mud as dirt rained over him. The Germans opened fire, but not on him. They were firing past the ravine, into the retreating American riflemen on the ridge. Bosch didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't blink. When another barrage of mortars began to fall, the Germans sprinted back up the slope. In the chaos, Bosch slithered from under the log and reached the next break in the line. He worked faster. He could already feel the pressure of the enemy attack coming like a physical presence, a force pushing, tightening, approaching. Each second, he lost men another platoon cut off, another foxhole overrun. Finally, he felt it, the faint electrical pulse of a live line. He had restored the phone circuit. But the moment he grabbed the handset and keyed it, he realized something terrifying. The Germans were already in the woods behind him. The counterattack had begun, and now they were between him and his own men. When the phone crackled to life, Bosch's relief lasted less than a heartbeat. The voice on the other end wasn't calm, it was panicked. Lieutenant, they've broken through B Company's line. Armor confirmed. Panthers or Mark IVs. Moving toward your sector. Bosch swallowed hard. He was now behind the German vanguard and in front of his own rifles. He was exactly where both sides were aiming. "Hold your fire," he hissed into the handset. "I'm in the ravine. I repeat, I am in the ravine." No one knew if the message reached the front. Shouting, explosions, and static swallowed everything. He had two options. 1. Stay hidden until the counterattack rolled over him. Or 2. Move toward the gunfire and reconnect the last deadline. The one that led directly to battalion artillery. Only artillery could stop German armor in the forest. The tanks had no room to maneuver, but the Americans had no room to escape. The first platoon already reported being flanked. Machine guns were folding. Men were yelling over each other on the radio. Confusion turning into desperation. If the line didn't come back up, the battalion would be overrun. And Bosch knew exactly where the last break was. It was halfway up the slope, in open view of the advancing Germans. He clutched his .45 pistol, knowing it was useless against a rifle squad, much less a tank. A shell landed so close the shockwave lifted him off the ground. When he touched down, ears ringing, he realized something important. The German infantry wasn't firing at him. They didn't know he was there. Not yet. The forest distorted sound. Direction meant nothing. Smoke turned visibility into a guessing game. In the chaos, Bosch had one advantage. He looked like every other filthy, half-blasted silhouette in the Hurtgen. He climbed. Every muscle burned as he reached the exposed slope. German boots were less than 30 meters away now. He saw shapes moving between trees, rifles angled downward, sweeping for survivors. A young soldier barked orders, pointing toward the very line Bosch needed to reach. He waited for the footsteps to fade, then sprinted. Bullets tore through branches overhead as machine gun tracers stitched the air. He dove behind a stump, wire clutched tight, praying the Germans thought the movement was just debris blown by the barrage. He pulled the cable up. Frayed, mud-soaked, dead. He worked fast, hands numb, splicing copper under fire. Then a voice. German, directly behind him. Bosch drew his .45 and turned, expecting death. Instead, he saw a lone German soldier staring back at him with the same expression. Surprise. Fear. Recognition of a man utterly out of place. Both raised their weapons. Only one fired. The German fell. Bosch didn't wait for the body to hit the ground. He finished the splice, jammed the handset to his ear, and yelled. Artillery. Fire for effect. Grid 423 now. The forest fell silent for a moment. Then the American guns answered. The first American shell screamed in overhead like a freight train, ripping through the fog before detonating somewhere behind Bosch. The blast flattened saplings and sent a rolling shockwave through the ravine. Then came the second and the third. Within seconds, the sky over the Hurtgen turned into a solid sheet of fire and shrapnel. Bosch pressed himself into the mud, covering his head with his arms as dirt and splinters rained down. He had just called artillery onto a grid the Germans already occupied, but dangerously close to his own position. The timing had to be perfect. One wrong bracket and the barrage would wipe out friendly lines, or him, before stopping the German armor. He grabbed the handset again. Left 50, dropped 200, fire for effect. Static, screams, gunfire, then acknowledgement. Shot out. Bosch felt the ground shiver as an entire battery of American 155s unleashed their full fury. Explosions marched across the forest in a brutal, synchronized rhythm. He could hear German officers shouting frantically, their attack dissolving into panic as tree bursts shredded their formations. The Panthers that had been moving up stalled, engines revving as splintered trunks and broken bodies blocked the narrow firebreak. The counterattack was dying, but the barrage was creeping closer. Bosch lifted his head, eyes burning from the smoke. A tree trunk exploded less than 20 feet away, throwing him sideways into a bush. His ears rang, his vision blurred. For a moment, he couldn't tell if he was hit or just concussed. He forced himself up. He had to adjust fire again. or the next salvo would walk directly onto him. He wiped mud from his face with a shaking hand and grabbed the handset. Stop! Stop! Check fire. Friendly position. No answer. He repeated it, louder, voice cracking. Still nothing. A fresh wave of shells tore open the slope, closer this time. Too close. He staggered, slipped, fell back down the ravine, tumbling in mud and smoke. He felt a hot sting in his shoulder, shrapnel grazing him as he rolled. He crawled behind a boulder, heart racing, breath short. He'd done it. The German attack was broken. But now he was trapped between his own artillery and the German survivors melting back into the trees. For a moment, everything fell quiet. Then he heard footsteps again, rapid, disorganized, retreating. German voices, moving away, and above them, distant but clear American shouts. Someone was pushing forward. Bosch gripped the boulder, hauled himself up, and realized if he didn't get out of this ravine now, he wouldn't survive the next salvo. He took one breath, deep, shaking, and began climbing toward his own lines if they were still there. Bosch dragged himself up the ravine wall, boots slipping in the churned mud. Every inch felt like a mile. The barrage had stopped, but the forest still echoed with the eerie after-silence of artillery. A hollow ringing mixed with the soft hiss of falling dust. Smoke drifted between the trees like ghosts. He was alive. The Germans were falling back, but he was still deep inside the area they had just fought to take. Halfway up the slope, he froze. A wounded German soldier was slumped against a tree, clutching his stomach. Young, maybe 19, his rifle lay out of reach, but his eyes were locked on a Bosch with the raw, animal fear of someone who knows death is moving toward him. Bosch raised his .45. The German raised a trembling hand, not to attack, but in surrender. For a long second, neither moved. Then Bosch lowered his pistol. There was no time, and killing him changed nothing. The forest had claimed enough. He continued climbing, slipping past the wounded man and cresting the ravine lip. The sight that met him was worse than the ravine. Fallen trees, burning brush, shattered helmets, abandoned machine gun belts. The German assault line had been obliterated, and somewhere ahead, his own men were still holding, if barely. He sprinted forward in short bursts, keeping low, weaving between trunks. He knew the American riflemen didn't expect anyone coming from this direction. One wrong move, and they'd shoot him on sight. He cupped his hand around his mouth and shouted, "Friendly coming through. Hold fire." Silence. Then a voice. "Identify yourself." "Lieutenant Bosch, 121st Infantry." Footsteps. Shapes emerging with rifles raised. For a brief moment, Bosch wondered if they even recognized him under the layers of mud and smoke. Then a sergeant from E Company stepped into view, wide-eyed. "Jesus, Lieutenant, we thought you were gone." Bosch staggered forward, nearly collapsing as adrenaline gave out. The sergeant caught him by the arm. "You just saved the whole damn flank. Artillery hit them so hard they're still running. What the hell were you doing out there alone?" Bosch leaned against a tree, chest heaving, trying to find the words. Fixing the phones, he finally said. The sergeant stared at him. That was suicide. Bosch wiped blood from his shoulder and stared back toward the ravine, where smoke still curled from shattered earth. "No," he answered quietly. "Letting them break through, that would have been." The forest rumbled again, this time American guns shifting fire deeper into German lines. The counterattack was over. The flank was saved. But the Hurtgen was not finished with any of them. The relief lasted less than 10 minutes. A runner from battalion stumbled into the line, panting harder than anyone had seen a man breathe. New German force forming on the left. Armor multiple tracks heard. They're regrouping. Bosch closed his eyes. Of course they were. The Hurtgen wasn't a battlefield. It was a grinder. Every time one wave broke, another formed, as though the forest itself demanded a constant blood tithe. The Germans knew the terrain better. They had the high ground. And Bosch's regiment was already at half strength. He didn't wait for orders. He grabbed a fresh spool of wire. "Lieutenant," the sergeant said sharply, "you can't go back out there. You're hit. You can barely stand." Bosch tightened the sling on his wounded shoulder. That counterattack won't stop itself. He didn't say the rest out loud. Without comms, the next German push would hit like a hammer on glass. He moved through the trees, ignoring the pain stabbing down his arm. This time he wasn't alone. 2 riflemen followed, sent by battalion to provide security. Both looked terrified, and Bosch didn't blame them. The new attack was coming from deeper in the forest, a place the maps barely covered. If the Germans broke through there, the American line would fold inward like a crushed lung. They reached the forward observation post, or what was left of it, a shattered log bunker, a broken radio, and 2 wounded artillery observers trying to bandage each other. The line's dead again, one of them rasped. Tree burst took it out. Armor's close. We can hear him. The ground trembled beneath their boots. Bosch knelt, found the wire, and followed it uphill toward where it had gone dark. Mortars thumped in the distance, ranging shots. The Germans were preparing their pre-assault barrage. He worked faster. The riflemen scanned the forest, fingers white on their triggers. Then one whispered, "Contact!" Through the trees came the unmistakable clatter of tank treads. Not a full column, just a probing force. But even one panzer could shatter the line if artillery couldn't target it. Bosch kept splicing, hands shaking, breath fogging, every instinct screaming at him to get down. A mortar exploded nearby, throwing all 3 men to the ground. Dirt and leaves rained across Bosch's helmet as he crawled back to the wire. He felt his fingertip brush raw copper. The line clicked. A spark jumped. Alive. He grabbed the handset, shouting into the receiver. Artillery. New target. Grid. Static swallowed his voice. He hit the casing with his palm. This is LT Bosch. Target. The static resolved, replaced by a calm voice. Go ahead, Lieutenant. We hear you. Bosch exhaled, chest shaking. Fire for effect. Now, the forest answered with a thunder that shook the earth. The Corsican dawn should have been quiet, but at 05:42, the horizon flashed white, as if someone had split the sky with an axe. The men of the 420th Signal Company, still half asleep, still cursing the cold, ran out of their tents expecting a Luftwaffe air raid. What they saw instead made several of them stop dead. Far off over the Mediterranean, a distant thunder rolled, not like bombs falling, but like mountains grinding together. The shockwave arrived 6 seconds later, enough to rattle fuel drums and send coffee mugs skittering across tables. One sergeant yelled, "Jesus, did the Jerry's hit one of our ammo ships?" But Captain Reed knew instantly. No German bomb makes that kind of sound. He and Lieutenant Mora climbed into a jeep and drove to the cliff overlooking the eastern coast. As they reached the ledge, the sky was still glowing faintly like embers under ash. Mora whispered. Was that from the direction of... Reed cut him off, voice tight. Yes, that was them. They had just heard the death of Operation C-47, their own experiment detonating itself in midair. Reed grabbed the binoculars and scanned the sky. No reki, no perishots, no smoke pillars drifting upward. Just an empty, unsettling stillness stretching across the Mediterranean. Mora swallowed. Sir, if it blew up that far offshore, then the Germans would have heard it too. Reed lowered the binoculars. Oh, they heard it, and they'll be coming. Before sunrise, encrypted messages were already flowing through intercept station from Sardinia to southern France. The Germans didn't know what had exploded, but they knew it had been big and that it didn't sound like an Allied accident. For the 420th Signal Company, the next phase of the mission was suddenly clear. Their secrecy was gone. Their enemy was now alert, and their unfinished work had just become 10 times more dangerous. By mid-afternoon, the Germans were sweeping the Mediterranean airwaves like bloodhounds. Their intercept stations in Toulon, Ajaccio, and Sardinia blasted out urgent traffic. An unknown Allied transmitter has gone silent. Locate any residual signals. That transmitter was C-47's experimental payload, the same device Reed and Mora had been trying to build, tune, and protect for months. Even destroyed, The machine left behind what the engineers called a radio ghost, a faint harmonic signature that could be detected if someone knew what to look for. And now the Germans were looking. Captain Reed assembled the entire company inside the operations tent. A map of the island stretched across a long table, cigarette smoke curling above it like fog. He stabbed a finger at the eastern ridgeline. This is where the ghost will drift. If they triangulate it, even a weak signal could lead them straight to us. So we do this fast, clean, and quiet. Lieutenant Mora added, "We move the lab. We tear down every trace of the C-47 project. We leave Corsica looking like we were never here." The men got to work immediately. Component crates were buried under scrub brush. Antenna poles were thrown off cliffs. Coils of cable were burned until the insulation curled like blackened paper. Even the experimental notebooks, months of calculations, were fed one page at a time into a drum fire. Engineer Paulson hesitated before tossing in the last logbook. "All this work gone." Reed nodded, jaw tight. "That explosion this morning means we're not ready. Maybe nobody will be. Not in this war." By sunset, the ridge was silent except for the crackle of the last dying embers. But the Germans did come. A Ju-88 reconnaissance plane made 3 slow passes over the region, its engines rumbling like distant artillery. The men hid in the rocks, bodies pressed flat, barely breathing. Reed watched it through binoculars, every muscle locked. If the plane spotted even a single scrap of equipment, the Luftwaffe would return with bombers. After the third pass, the Ju-88 banked northeast and vanished. Only then did Reed allow the breath to escape his chest. At midnight, the 420th Signal Company evacuated the site entirely, hiking single file down the mule path toward the coast. They boarded a small coastal transport that slipped away under blackout conditions. As Corsica faded behind them, Mora leaned on the rail and whispered, "So after everything, the prototype's gone, the data's gone, and nobody will ever know what we built." Reed stared at the dark water. Some victories aren't about what you create. They're about what you keep out of the enemy's hands. He turned away from the sea. And besides, this war's not over. We'll have other chances. The ship pushed south through the night. No lights, no markings, just a ghost among the waves. Carrying the men who had built something the world was not yet ready to understand, and had then erased it to save thousands of lives. The official record would say only, Experimental Communications Detachment redeployed. But their story, buried, classified, almost lost, remains one of the strangest quiet battles fought in the shadows of World War II.